There's this kind of weird argument that a lot of atheists have taken from the work of David Hume, arch skeptic. He was probably an atheist himself, nearly certainly was, but Hume has this argument that people will say is supposed to be against miracles. It's, people will say, oh, maybe miraculous things could happen. David Hume has this argument for, why they don't, or at least that's what it's quoted as, although it's not that. David Hume, fundamentally, he was a skeptic who followed his skepticism to its logical conclusion, and that is ultimately we can't really have knowledge of anything. That's just how it is. You can't be halfway a skeptic. You have to apply that to the most extreme degree. But either way, here's what Hume's alleged argument against miracles is. He says this, okay? Imagine, so let's say something miraculous happens. Let's say someone rises from the dead. I think that's the original example he uses. He's talking about the resurrection of Christ or something like that. Imagine you see someone resurrect from the dead. That's your observation. Okay, that's your empirical sense data. Now, you're faced with a question. Whenever you see something that's unlikely or allegedly miraculous, you are faced with two choices implicitly, whether you realize it or not. One is you could believe what you just saw, or the other one is you could kind of out of a plausibility judgment or a statistical judgment, you could induce that you have misperceived the alleged miracle. And what Hume says is that every time, more or less every time we have a normal, non-miraculous experience of life, you observe, for example, when humans die, they stay dead. They don't rise from the dead, right? That is a statistical, let's say you can have a Bayesian algorithm that is integrating that information. Every time you learn, okay, another person died, they didn't rise from the dead. Another person died, they didn't rise from the dead. Another person died, they didn't rise from the dead, right? And as time goes on, you eventually become very much convinced that people don't rise from the dead. So Hume more or less said, he wasn't talking about Bayesian anything or whatever, but Hume's argument is more or less, okay, well, if you have kind of an established way that the universe works, when people die, they don't rise from the dead, and you see a contradiction to that, there's always a stronger case to make for believing that your own senses are in error, right? So therefore, you shouldn't believe this. You shouldn't believe, if you see someone rising from the dead, you shouldn't believe it, right? Even if you see it with your own eyes, because you are implicitly saying the entire architecture of the universe has been subverted. And, rather than just, admitting kind of what you see. Now, it's important to note that this argument, even though it's kind of portrayed as an argument against miracles, it's not an argument against miracles. It's actually an argument against believing in miracles. And those are two utterly different things, because Hume ultimately is not saying or even arguing that miracles are impossible. In fact, you could say this in any other, a really good example, I think, that talks about, I guess, the problem of induction, kind of philosophical problems is, Nassim Taleb has this, what he calls the turkey problem, right? So imagine a different situation. You are a turkey. You're a turkey scientist. And you're on a turkey farm with a bunch of, there's a farmer and there's a whole bunch of turkeys. So every day, you wake up and the farmer feeds you. And he feeds you breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I don't know how often turkeys eat. He always takes care of you and all the other turkeys every day. If a turkey is sick, he nurses them to health. And so every day you are given some statistical fact, and or let's say you are led to an inductive conclusion. The inductive conclusion is that farmers love turkeys. They feed us. They do all these great things. And every single day you wake up and you get more and more evidence to the fact that farmers just love turkeys. So a widely debunked conspiracy theorist turkey might say, I think the farmer's going to kill us. I think that the farmer actually plans eventually to kill the turkeys. And you can put on your Reddit or Fedora and say, no, actually, my Bayesian statistics, my inductive reasoning have led me to think that every single day we have more and more and more and more evidence that the farmer loves turkeys, right? The farmer just loves turkeys. He wants to keep us alive. He really genuinely cares for us. Now, eventually, there's going to come a day that the farmer, Thanksgiving is coming, and the farmer is going to kill all the turkeys. He's going to kill the nerd turkey. who said all this stuff. And the nerd turkey is going to be, there's going to be a Thanksgiving meal. His little turkey ghost is going to be floating above the table, and he's going to say, well, still, he believes Hume's argument. He's going to say, I still have more reason to believe that I'm just perceiving this the wrong way, because all the evidence says that, people love, or farmers love turkeys, right? Now, obviously, that's a pretty absurd example, but it's important to remember that, that kind of skepticism is really setting you up to say that there's nothing outside of, let's say, there's nothing unpredictable about the world. The architecture of the universe, I fully understand. Nothing else. It's not even about miracles themselves. It's about anything unexpected couldn't possibly happen. When you're making this argument against even miracles, the word miracle, ultimately, you can think of it as just any kind of unlikely event, right? Or any event that, we don't understand exactly the scientific or the kind of material origin of it. It's just how it is. If the entire universe is, just like a water droplet on a leaf in a bigger universe, and, someone walks by it and shakes our water droplet, it's going to affect our universe in totally unpredictable, untestable, unempirical ways, that we can't replicate in a scientific setting. But nonetheless, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen, right? It still happened. It is a miracle on the scale of that universe. That's just how it is. I think at the same time, I've said, there's, just to cite people that Redditors like, back in Carl Sagan's old, documentary series, on Cosmos, whatever it is, which, of course, Black Science Man redid and made it even worse. But there's this one episode where he talks about, basically, the fact that we live in a universe where we can have science and where we can have life, because let's say the universe is not perfectly stable, but it also isn't too chaotic, right? So it's really, we can have science because, you need some kind of systematicity that you can test, but there also has to be variability that you can test. And by the same way, in order to have life, you can't have a perfectly static universe, and you can't have a perfectly chaotic universe. You have to have somewhere in between. So isn't it nice that we live somewhere in between? But I think really the thing to look at is, let's say, natural features of the universe, scientific, in truth, our universe is a mix of both. We have some things that are incredibly predictable, and we have some things that are incredibly chaotic. It's not an either or kind of thing. It's not as if we live, I don't know, it's just inaccurate to say that we live in an either or thing. In reality, there are some things that are just so unlikely. So they're there, but they're so infrequent that, like the turkey problem or like someone rising from the dead, it's always going to seem like a miracle when it actually happens. And that's just how it is. There's no reason, when you say something like you can't expect unlikely or miraculous things to happen, you're really just ruling out an entire part of reality, right? So when you see people who are talking about kind of, they're dismissing things that might be quote unquote miraculous or quote unquote paranormal or whatever, it's important to realize that there can be interactions to reality that don't work exactly in the way we understand. That's just, it's almost a tautology. This should almost be trivially true, but I think there's a tendency of people in the modern world to paint the world in there's the physical and there's the metaphysical. It's the magical stuff, and it's just people just believe magical stuff, and sometimes they do for funny reasons. But you can't really rule out. You can't artificially declare what is real and what isn't beforehand. An example I've used in one of the articles on my website is gravity. Gravity is a good example of something where before the theory of gravity, gravity ultimately it's a mathematical solution to a physical problem. But the force itself is utterly occult. We don't understand, we've never understood how gravity works. We can describe how it works, but the force behind it is it literally is paranormal. It's force exerts itself at a distance. That is pseudoscience in the definition of the mechanistic universe that people had for, thousands of years, basically. That is occult. But we're now just used to the fact that it exists, and it solves for problem. It solves for why the planets, move in a loop. and why things fall to the earth. Those are seemingly disparate facts, but the theory of gravity integrates those things. So I don't think we should necessarily dismiss other similar, like the possibility of other similar unifications of different phenomena, you know, or say, oh, it's paranormal, so we can't consider it, because, I mean, gravity is paranormal. Science is mostly paranormal. You just see it over and over again, and then it starts seeming normal, but it's still just as weird. Anyway, I gotta get inside. My hands are kind of cold, but that's about all I wanted to say.